Abraham Lincoln's life story is one of the most remarkable in American history, starting from humble beginnings and rising to the highest office in the land. He was born on February 12, 1809, in a one-room log cabin on the Sinking Spring Farm in Hardin County, Kentucky, now part of LaRue County. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, were uneducated farmers. They lived a difficult life on the frontier, where survival required hard work and resilience. The Lincoln family was far from wealthy. Abraham grew up in the harsh conditions of early 19th century America, where access to education and opportunity was limited, especially for rural families. His mother died when he was just 9 years old, a devastating loss that deeply affected him. A year later, his father remarried, and his stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston Lincoln, played a vital role in encouraging young Abe's intellectual curiosity. She recognized his love for learning and supported his efforts to read and write, despite the family's poverty. Formal schooling was scarce. Lincoln had fewer than 12 months of classroom education throughout his life, yet he had an insatiable appetite for learning. He borrowed books whenever he could, reading classics like the Bible, Aesop's Fables, and Robinson Crusoe. He would often walk for miles to get a single book. His ability to absorb knowledge and teach himself became one of his defining traits. As a teenager, Lincoln worked hard, doing physical labor, splitting rails, building fences, and helping on the farm. He also worked on flatboats, transporting goods down the Mississippi River, which exposed him to the broader world and to the horrors of slavery, something that would later shape his political and moral views. In his early 20s, Lincoln moved to New Salem, Illinois, where he took on various jobs: store clerk, postmaster, and eventually he began to study law. He gained a reputation for honesty, earning the nickname Honest Abe. He also developed his skills as a speaker and debater, impressing locals with his wit and intelligence. Lincoln's early life is a testament to self-reliance and determination. Without wealth, connections, or formal education, he climbed out of obscurity through sheer effort and intellect. His story resonates because it represents the idea of the self-made man, a central concept in American culture. It shows that greatness can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. These humble beginnings were not just a part of Lincoln's biography. They shaped who he was. The struggles he endured gave him empathy for common people and a profound understanding of hardship. His background allowed him to connect with citizens across the country, from farmers to intellectuals. In an era when many leaders came from privilege, Lincoln stood out as someone who truly understood the working class. His rise from a log cabin to the White House remains one of the most powerful narratives in American history. Abraham Lincoln's path to political power was far from straightforward. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he didn't come from a wealthy or influential background. What set Lincoln apart was his sharp intellect, remarkable communication skills, and deep-rooted principles. His political journey began in the 1830s and spanned decades, marked by persistence, setbacks, and a growing reputation as a voice of reason and justice. Lincoln's first real step into public service came in 1832, when he ran for the Illinois state legislature. At the age of 20, he lost, but it was only a temporary defeat. 2 years later, in 1834, he was elected as a member of the Illinois House of Representatives, where he served 4 terms. During this time, he developed strong debating skills and became known for his clear thinking and moral integrity. While in the state legislature, Lincoln began to study law seriously. By 1836, he passed the bar exam and became a practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois. As an attorney, he was admired for his honesty and ability to simplify complex issues. often winning over juries with his plain-spoken wisdom and logic. His legal career helped build his public image and introduced him to influential people in Illinois. Lincoln returned to national politics in 1846 when he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He served a single term from 1847 to 1849. During this time, he spoke out against the Mexican-American War, which was unpopular with many of his constituents. This, along with his moderate stance on slavery, made his political career stall temporarily. He went back to practicing law, but remained a keen observer of national affairs, especially as tensions over slavery continued to escalate. The turning point in Lincoln's political life came in 1854, when the Kansas-Nebraska Act reopened the debate over the expansion of slavery into new territories. Lincoln was deeply opposed to the spread of slavery, believing it was morally wrong and a threat to the nation's unity. This issue pulled him back into politics with renewed passion. In 1858, he ran for the U.S. Senate against Stephen A. Douglas, a prominent Democrat. The campaign became legendary, thanks to the Lincoln-Douglas debates, a series of public arguments that showcased Lincoln's eloquence and moral clarity. Though Lincoln lost the Senate race, the debates catapulted him into the national spotlight. In 1860, Lincoln was nominated as the Republican candidate for president. Many in the party saw him as a moderate who could appeal to both abolitionists and more conservative Northerners. His humble roots, strong principles, and powerful oratory made him a compelling candidate. On November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected as the 16th President of the United States. His victory shocked the South and led to immediate secession threats. The country was on the brink of civil war, but Lincoln had finally risen to the highest office, ready to face the greatest challenge of his life. When Abraham Lincoln took office as the 16th President of the United States in March 1861, the country was already tearing at the seams. His election had triggered a political earthquake. By the time of his inauguration, 7 Southern states had already seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. Lincoln inherited a nation on the edge of war, and within weeks, conflict broke out with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter in April 1861. The American Civil War had begun. Leading a divided nation through war was a monumental task, and Lincoln had little military experience. Still, he quickly proved to be a capable wartime leader. He studied strategy obsessively, read military manuals, and regularly met with generals to understand battlefield operations. Though he faced criticism for his early choices in military leadership, he never stopped learning. Eventually, he found in Ulysses S. Grant a general who could turn the tide of war. Beyond the battlefield, Lincoln's leadership was defined by moral clarity and political skill. He consistently emphasized the preservation of the Union as his top priority, even when pressured from both sides. Abolitionists wanted him to act faster on slavery, while border state Unionists feared any action would drive more states to secede. Lincoln navigated these opposing forces with patience and vision. One of the most defining moments of his leadership came on January 4, 1863, with the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. While it did not instantly free all enslaved people, it declared that all slaves in Confederate-controlled territories were to be freed. This act transformed the Civil War from a battle to preserve the Union into a moral struggle to end slavery. It also allowed black men to join the Union Army, adding strength to the Northern cause and reshaping the nature of the conflict. Lincoln also understood the importance of unity and morale. He often visited troops at the front lines and wrote countless letters of encouragement to soldiers and grieving families. He held the nation together with words as well as action. Nowhere is this more evident than in his Gettysburg Address, delivered in November 1863. In just 27 words, Lincoln redefined the war as a test of whether a nation founded on liberty and equality could survive. Politically, Lincoln faced constant opposition. He dealt with dissent from Congress, hostile newspapers, and public weariness of a long and bloody war. Yet he managed to be re-elected in 1864, a powerful sign that many Americans believed in his leadership and the cause he championed. By early 1865, the end of the war was near. Lincoln focused on healing and reconstruction, urging forgiveness and unity instead of punishment. In his second inaugural address, he famously said, "The nation must move forward with malice toward none, with charity for all." Through it all, Lincoln led not just with strategy, but with heart. He carried the enormous weight of a fractured country with humility and determination. His Civil War leadership defined his legacy and saved the United States from collapse. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863, stands as a watershed moment in American history. It transformed the Civil War from a fight to preserve the Union into a crusade for human freedom. Though often misunderstood in its immediate effect, the proclamation was both a moral declaration and a strategic masterstroke, with lasting consequences for the nation. Lincoln had long opposed slavery. While he wasn't always a vocal abolitionist, he believed slavery was morally wrong and incompatible with the founding principles of the United States. However, in the early years of the Civil War, Lincoln treaded carefully. His primary goal was to preserve the Union, and he feared that an aggressive stance on slavery might drive border states like Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland into joining the Confederacy. By mid-1862, the war had dragged on, with heavy casualties and no clear end in sight. Public pressure grew for a stronger stand against slavery. Lincoln also saw an opportunity. Weakening the South's economic base, built on slave labor, could hurt the Confederate war effort. In secret, Lincoln began drafting the Emancipation Proclamation. He waited for a Union military victory before announcing it, so it wouldn't seem like a desperate move. That moment came with the Battle of Antietam in September 1862. Although it was a costly and inconclusive battle, it provided enough momentum for Lincoln to act. On September 22, 1862, he issued a preliminary version of the Emancipation Proclamation, giving the Confederate States 100 days to return to the Union or face the freeing of their slaves. When the deadline passed, Lincoln made good on his promise. On January 1, 1863, the final Emancipation Proclamation was signed. It declared that all enslaved people in states in rebellion against the United States were henceforth and forever free. It did not apply to slave-holding border states or areas already under Union control, which caused criticism. However, the symbolic impact was enormous. The Emancipation Proclamation had several major effects. It redefined the purpose of the Civil War. From that point forward, the Union was fighting not just to preserve the nation, but to end slavery. It prevented foreign powers, especially Britain and France, which had already abolished slavery, from recognizing or supporting the Confederacy. It allowed African Americans to join the Union Army, giving the North a critical boost in manpower. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 black soldiers and sailors had served the Union cause. It paved the way for the 13th Amendment, which would permanently abolish slavery in the United States. Though the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free every enslaved person instantly, it marked a turning point. It was a bold act of leadership, rooted in Lincoln's evolving moral convictions and political genius. In issuing it, Lincoln risked political backlash and intensified the stakes of the war. But he also gave it a profound new meaning. The proclamation reshaped the national identity of the United States, aligning it more closely with its founding ideals of liberty and justice for all. It remains one of the most significant presidential actions in American history. On November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln delivered what would become one of the most famous speeches in American history. The Gettysburg Address, spoken in less than 3 minutes and composed of just 72 words. The speech redefined the meaning of the Civil War, reaffirmed the principles of democracy, and helped cement Lincoln's legacy as one of the greatest orators in U.S. history. The backdrop was the Battle of Gettysburg, fought in early July 1863. It was one of the bloodiest and most pivotal clashes of the Civil War, resulting in over 50,000 casualties. The Union victory there marked a turning point in the war, but the cost in human lives was staggering. In the months following the battle, a portion of the battlefield was designated as a national cemetery to honor those who had fallen. Lincoln was invited to deliver a few appropriate remarks at the dedication ceremony. The main speaker of the day, Edward Everett, a renowned orator, spoke for over 2 hours. Then Lincoln rose, and in just a few brief minutes, he delivered a message that would echo through history. He began with the now iconic phrase, "47 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal." With those words, Lincoln tied the Civil War back to the founding ideals of the United States, specifically the Declaration of Independence, not just the Constitution. He reminded the audience that the nation had been built on a promise of equality and freedom, and that the war was a test of whether those principles could endure. Lincoln did not dwell on the horrors of battle or assign blame. Instead, he offered a call to action for the living. It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. He honored the dead by challenging the nation to continue their fight, not just on the battlefield, but in the cause of unity, liberty, and democracy. The speech concluded with one of the most powerful lines in American rhetoric: "The government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." These words captured Lincoln's vision of democracy as a living, breathing ideal, something to be protected and passed on. He reframed the Civil War as not only a struggle to save the Union, but to uphold the very principle of self-governance. At the time, reactions to the speech were mixed. Some newspapers criticized it as too short or overly simple, but over time, the Gettysburg Address came to be seen as a literary and philosophical masterpiece. It became a touchstone for American identity, quoted in schools, memorials, and political discourse for generations. The Gettysburg Address wasn't just a speech. It was a moral compass. It helped the nation understand why the Civil War mattered and what was truly at stake: the survival of freedom, equality, and democracy itself. As the American Civil War drew to a close in April 1865, President Abraham Lincoln could finally see the fruits of his long and painful efforts to preserve the Union. The Confederate capital, Richmond, had fallen, and General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9. It seemed a time for healing and rebuilding, but just days later, Lincoln's life and presidency was cut tragically short. On the evening of April 14, 1865, Lincoln attended a play, Our American Cousin, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., with his wife Mary Todd Lincoln. During the performance, John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer, entered the presidential box and shot Lincoln in the back of the head at close range. Booth shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," Latin for "thus always to tyrants," as he leaped onto the stage and fled. Lincoln was taken to a nearby boarding house and died the next morning, on April 15, 1865, becoming the first U.S. president to be assassinated. The nation was plunged into deep mourning. News of Lincoln's death spread rapidly, and across the Union, citizens wept openly. Bells tolled, businesses closed, and communities held memorials. His body was taken on a 2-week funeral train journey from Washington to Springfield, Illinois, stopping in many cities along the way so millions of Americans could pay their respects. Booth was hunted down and killed 12 days later, and several of his co-conspirators were captured and executed. The plot had included plans to kill other top government officials, aiming to destabilize the Union government just as the war was ending. Though the plan failed in its full intent, the loss of Lincoln was a staggering blow. But Lincoln's death also sealed his place in history as a martyr for liberty and unity. In life, he had been a controversial figure, criticized by abolitionists for being too cautious and by others for being too radical. In death, he became a unifying symbol of courage, wisdom, and sacrifice. His vision for a more perfect union inspired generations to come. His legacy is vast. The 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in all U.S. states and territories, was passed later that year, completing the work the Emancipation Proclamation had started. Lincoln's belief in democracy, equality, and national unity continues to influence American politics, civil rights movements, and leaders around the world. Monuments, schools, and cities have been named in his honor. The Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., stands as a tribute not just to the man, but to the ideals he upheld. His words, especially the Gettysburg Address and his second inaugural address, are still studied, memorized, and quoted as guiding lights of American value. Abraham Lincoln's life was defined by struggle, principle, and perseverance. His assassination was a national tragedy, but it immortalized his role as the president who saved the Union and redefined freedom. His legacy endures as a testament to what leadership, compassion, and conviction can achieve, even in the darkest times.